Yep. These don't light up, huh? It's on.
It is 5:07. This is the September 18th Findlay City Council Water and Sewer Committee meeting. Do apologize for the delay in the start. We had a little technical issue getting sound going so that we could properly record and stream the meeting. Councilman Baumann mentioned that he was not going to be at today's meeting because he is still under the weather. I'll make a motion to excuse Brian.
A second.
And all in favor of excusing Brian, please say aye.
Hi.
Thank you. And first order is we have, I think it's July 31st minutes of our last meeting. That was the kind of the emergency, we got a leak in the water department or the water plant meeting. And looking for changes or a motion to approve the minutes as circulated. Mr. Palmer?
Motion to approve.
Second, Mr. Greeno. Any discussion? All in favor of approving the minutes, please say aye.
Aye.
And they are approved. First order of business, new items, long-term control plan funding. Mr. Kalb.
Yeah, so pretty much I think this one should be easy. So when we talked about this in 22, originally the scope was over 500,000. At that time, I believe it was the auditor that suggested to break it up into two different phases. The first phase will be pretty much data collection. Second phase is where we actually interpret the data, come up with the alternates and all that kind of stuff. Well, with the timeline where we're at right now, we have all the data collected. We're ready to start with the running the model, so that way we can figure out what projects are going to be coming out of this, the financial end, all that kind of stuff. So this is phase two. They're asking their compensation for that, which is still matching what their original documents were, is $217,000, which comes out to the five. We originally appropriated 390, but I'll be appropriating, or I'll be asking for the 217. That way I have a little bit of buffer just if you have any changes, anything like that. But really just wanted to come back with you guys for the request back in 22 when we have the phase two come up to meet in front of you guys, but we're coming up to that time zone.
So the original appropriation was, or we expected it, you said 390?
Yeah, we originally appropriated 390. The original contract for the phase one was 355. We appropriated 390 just to have a little bit of buffer in there. This phase two is 217, so that comes out to what, 572 roughly.
And you're asking for, you're asking for the full 217?
Yeah, the 217. I'd like to appropriate all of that just so that way, just in case something pops up, if we have to rerun a model or reflow test or something like that, I have a little extra funds in there.
Coming out of?
That'll be coming out of the sewer fund.
Jeremy, with the dry weather, were they able to get good readings? Did
We-
they feel they got good readings? On
Yeah,
the
so
flow monitoring?
we sent the typical year, a new typical year to the EPA. They're reviewing that right now. We actually extended it a little bit longer than what we were thinking. We ran it through because we were having a drier year. But working with the EPA, we were able to use past data and data in other areas that we can use as our comp for that to develop our typical year. But we still have a lot of flow meters in that are permanent and a lot of them that are still there. So if we come in those situations, we would like to capture a higher when the river comes up a little bit. We weren't able to, but with what we have so far, we have a model that we can calibrate on.
Okay, but you do have the flow meter still in case that does
Yeah,
happen.
we
so you
have
can
6
grab that
permanent
information.
ones in right
Okay.
now.
Okay.
So.
And the flow modeling, how long do you think that will take?
So they're finishing that up right now. So we have to have, they're wrapping up the calibrating of that. The second phase of that is kind of interpreting all that. Right now with our schedule, we have to have a draft of the final amendment to the EPA by December of 25. So I would say late summer of 25 is when we'll start having ideas of what our alternates are going to be. And then once it gets to the EPA hands, it could be 2 months, it could be 8 months until they give final approval. So we can't really start anything until the final approval. So right now we're just expecting, we have in the contract of October of 26 as our final completion.
Okay, thank you.
So knowing that this is our second shot at a long-term control plan, and I view this, the step we've taken so far as gathering inputs. Does the inputs we gathered this time kind of match what we saw the last time, or are we even comparing that?
We have compared that, and it's different than what it is. Especially like our typical year of what we're using this time is actually is closer to what we actually see in a typical year. Before, a typical year they used, I believe, was 2011, which was notoriously wet that year, so it was kind of an abnormally for that. And then one of the gauges that we were supposed to be gauging off of, we found there was as we were doing this, there was a default, or there was a problem with that. So with what we've sent to the typical year for EPA approval, and they've pretty much agreed with everything we've had with that, it is going to change how the system reacts. So they've met multiple times with the guys out in the field because those guys know when water comes up, a certain level in the river where they're going to have problems in their sewer, and it's starting. Our model, the way it sounds, is reacting what they're seeing out there, and if they don't see that in the model, they've been coming down, talking to our guys again, and seeing, okay, does it react in this area on the north end? Why is it coming out? Why are you guys saying it's coming out here and not here? I know we've came out a couple of times checking weirs and all that kind of stuff, but we feel pretty confident. Long story short, we feel pretty confident in what we're showing now because the data is is showing of what our guys on the field real time are seeing.
So back to the financials. You said 390 for the first phase and 217.
So phase one, the actual contract was 355.
Oh.
We appropriated 390 as part of the appropriation.
Okay.
The phase two will be 217. So I will be requesting just the 217. So that extra 40-some thousand that we had from the previous one will be my buffer. So I'll ask for that full amount. That way I still have some buffer.
Okay,
in
so
there.
390 plus 217 is 507. I thought you said 572 or something.
Well, the 355 and 217.
Okay. Yeah, okay, very good. All right. Okay.
I'd
607. Okay.
other questions?
No.
Motion that we appropriate $217,000 out of the sewer fund for phase two work, the long-term control plan. Second, Mr. Greeno. We have a motion and a second. Discussion. Seeing as though there's none, all in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
And the motion passes. Thank you. Next up, Howard Run Ditch Maintenance Funding. I think I'm going to start on this one. I think there's, I mentioned this last night, there's 3 questions that we're potentially asking. The first one that the committee needs to recommend is whether we think this is an appropriate responsibility of the city of Findlay. And if we do agree on that, then a look at the amount of funding and where the funding comes from, knowing full well that we have an amendment or a ordinance, some kind of legislation that got first reading last night. And with the Howard Run, with the question of is it our responsibility? When we looked at Dazel Ditch back in 10 years ago or so, one of Service Safety Director Schmelzer's comments that I think rings true is he called ditches storm sewers without a top on them, in essence. And ditches obviously are a unique beast because they traverse political boundaries, have their own special love in the Ohio Revised Code as to how they're supposed to be maintained. And that makes them unique. But once they're inside the city, they function in essence as a storm sewer. So then that's the question is within the inside. If you had a ditch, for example, that was 100% inside the city, would you think it's the city's responsibility to maintain it? You know, with existing funding and all that. So that's kind of the first question. I'm just interested in the committee's thoughts as to is it proper responsibility for the city to take this on?
I'm generally in agreement with that concept that it isn't a storm sewer without a pipe in it, and I'm okay with the city doing that, funding that.
I think there was some conception or belief that, you know, any ditches that came through the city were the county's to take care of. But I don't know that that is a true statement or not. And I really have no problem maintaining a ditch that is in the city because I think it helps anybody's storm sewer water that goes to that ditch. That helps keep it out of people's basements and stuff like that. So I think maintaining a ditch in the city is proper use of this funding, my opinion.
Mr. Palmer?
Yeah, these ditches do act like a storm sewer without a pipe, as has been repeated, and it benefits our constituents. I mean, it's something that keeps it out of their yards, out of their basements. It's a benefit. So I agree with the city contributing to this for sure.
Yeah, as do I for all the reasons stated. So then you have the conceptual issue. You have a ditch that goes that's in the county. It's inside and outside the city. And let's say for just for example discussion, it cost $100,000 to clean the entire ditch, and 60% of the land that supports the ditch is outside of the city, and 40% is inside the city. And if it costs $100,000, that means the city's responsibility share would be $40,000 inside the city and $60,000 outside the city. And I think it's reasonable for us to assume the $40,000 that the citizens bear that cost. But I also don't think that means you take a $100,000 project, that you take $40,000 out of it, so it's now a $60,000 project, and spread those costs evenly across city and county. Mm-hmm. I think that at the end of the day, the citizens in the county pay 60%. The citizens via their municipal government pay 40%. And I'm curious if that is the understanding of if we contribute, how the county is going to apply our funding.
So talking with them, I mean, it's really how we want to apply with that. They would, from their end, for ease of calculating all that kind of stuff, they would like to see where we just contribute X amount of money towards the project, and then everyone, rates drop from there. But we can say where, and then the number that I have as part of that ordinance is everyone that's within the city limits. That cost is what that is within the city limits. So if you guys say, hey, we want to have City of Findlay not pay, and this is covering our cost for it, and everyone outside drop down their rate to, what, like you were saying, kind of the they pay the 20% or whoever it is from the drop down rate, what that cost is, they can do that as well. So their preference is just, hey, we have a certain percentage, but they can go both ways.
And what was that number
So,
inside the city?
so for the construction and engineering, it was 286,787.30. The maintenance assessment, for just the city is 14,825, but we included the whole 24,000 as part of that because there's only 800 feet that's not within the city limits of the ditch, and that is at the Finley Pallet, which is, I believe they were talking about annexing into the city. So I included that whole 24,000 in that, which will give you a total of $311,028.38. Which I believe I appropriated. I rounded it up to $311,030.
And this maintenance fee, is that a one-time?
It was a 5% maintenance account on that, so that covered all that for the whole project. That's for everyone within it, but the way when I originally was looking at that, since the whole ditch itself is, except for 800 feet of the 16,000 feet, 800 feet is outside the city limits. That's why we include the whole thing, but I do have that broken out where it is just within the city limits.
But it's not just the linear length. It's not the specific length of the ditch. It is the watershed that it feeds, it services.
Correct. Yeah, I guess correct. Yeah.
And you know, I understand from the county standpoint why they would rather us just take it off the top and then reallocate, and that's because it's easier. You know, an alternative way for us to do this is say we're going to give the county nothing, and then have citizens who have that on their tax bills come to the city and cut them a check, reimburse them, say we'll do that for, you know, we'll pay the whole thing. That's in essence what we're in. They're getting a liability, and that's in essence what we're trying to do. We're just trying to save that step. But if you said, hey, if you're in the city of Findlay and you come in and, you know, show us your bill, and we'll pay for it. It gets you to the same thing.
I don't think we want to go
And,
there.
and I quite honestly, I don't know the detail. I don't recall the details of how Dazel was done. If how that payment was made. But I'm concerned that if we do this for 311, and that our best intents are not going to be realized. I don't know what we do to assure on the county side that whatever we intend is how they apply it. Because I you know, once the money's in their hands, can they do whatever they want with it, in essence, or do we hand it to them with strings?
Yeah, we would, if we gave them this money, then it would have to be what we would agree upon for that. So however you guys structure that.
Would there be a written contract? Probably would.
Right, like, yeah, an MOU
An
of
MOU,
some sort that
okay.
would have to be
Right.
because of the transferring of money. It wouldn't just be write a check
Okay.
and send over. We would have to have an
So let's get
understanding.
the MOU written and approved in advance, right? Before
Okay.
we give them the check?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
that can be done.
All right.
But, you know, like I said, with that, I included the whole maintenance. Not to keep throwing numbers at you, but if you wanted to include only the maintenance within the city of Findlay and the construction within the city of Findlay, that total comes up to $301,613.21.
Yeah, I think we should just keep it clean. We do ours, they do theirs.
Okay.
Don't mix it.
Okay.
You know, I mean, the 10 grand's not significant, but.
Right.
I
And
just-
that's what I just wanted to have
Yeah.
a discussion point on that, on
Yeah.
what you guys felt. So it was just
Yeah.
trying to put some numbers together.
Can I just ask you, how do they clean these ditches? They taking an excavator and just dipping it the whole way? Is that how?
Yeah,
hire a
they'll be going
contractor?
through, dipping it, removing trees, just
Okay.
pretty much cleaning out the edges, putting in riprap or some kind of,
Okay.
berm that is needed down through there.
Okay.
But yeah, it'll be pretty similar to
So-
what they did.
So we're talking about Howard Run, it's a designated issue, and then there's gotta be a zillion little tributaries coming into it. How do we define this one we're taking care of, but all these tributaries we're not? How do we close that Pandora's box? You know, I mean.
I couldn't tell you how they decide on, with those smaller ones coming in, but we do have, like the storm pipes, we have a lot of storm pipes going into it that they would have to reinstate, make sure that those are in working
Yeah.
condition as we're going through. And per their estimate, they do have pipe clean outs and new conduits and stuff like that.
Are we concerned about that, guys? I mean, about, these little tributaries coming into Howard Run,
Well,
and
it-
where does it
I
end?
don't think there's that many tributaries. I know there's a lot of storm sewer pipes that
Okay.
go into it.
Is that right? Okay.
So, and that would be part of what they're covering when they're going down through there. If they see a pipe that's broken down or the head wall's missing or something, if it's a big enough pipe, I would assume that would be repaired and fixed during the construction portion of it, so.
Yeah, I mean, they'll be like the mouths of the tributaries and stuff. They'll be bowling those out and making sure it's a smooth transition. But they, going back in, they're pretty much going to stay within their work
Okay.
limits that has been defined as part of this.
Okay.
I think more concerning or more relevant to me is not the tributaries into the Howard Ditch, but it's the other ditches. So we're basically having a conversation about Howard Ditch in particular, but really we're having a general discussion about all ditches within the city. Oil ditch is another one. I know we've discussed. I don't know what the other ones, and I'm curious to have you what other ditch projects do we have going through the process? And what kind of liability do you think we're seeing we would have on other ditch cleaning processes or projects in the next 10 years?
I believe the only other one that's kind of active right now is the oil ditch. It just is pretty much in the final construction. That's probably going to be the next one that we'll be seeing going out. But I don't believe there's any other ditches that are in petition right now. There's ditches all across the city, but they're kind of like where Howard Run. It was a ditch that was used as a drainage outlet, but it had no petition or any means of being cleaned. Realistically, the way they look at it is if there's no petition with it or there's no maintenance as part of it, then it's the property owner owns to the center of that ditch. That's their responsibility to keep it clean. I know with Howard Run, since I've been here, we've had numerous calls on downed trees that are blocking water and stuff like that. So, we have those all the way across. There's a lot of ditches in here that are not maintained. But as of right now, there's no other ditch besides oil that is in a petition process.
So what is the size of oil in terms of, length and cost and liability compared to Howard? Is it a smaller, or is it a larger scale or smaller scale? than Howard, or-
I think from the last estimate that we seen from them, I want to say it's smaller.
Smaller?
I believe the ditch is smaller.
Yeah.
Some of
Is
it's
it?
actually underground. Oil ditch.
Yeah, a section from like Sandusky area
Over
to
to
Main Cross is
all
underground.
It's piping, yeah.
Is that going to the county too? It's kind of a shared deal, or?
So, yeah.
So once it's in petition, it'll be theirs. If
Okay.
they'll have to maintain it, make sure it's
Yeah.
free flowing from there.
And the maintenance of these ditches is done by who?
From here on out,
From here on out,
I believe it will be the county.
the county, and will they do like yearly inspections, or will they, to make sure there's not down trees and,
I believe so, and that's what part of that maintenance
not fee is?
fee is part of.
So oil, Howard, Dazzell are the only ones that would be reasonably to expect we would.
Those are the main petition ditches that here recently. There's a couple of them.
How about ones that in the past that have given headaches?
Yeah,
You
I
know,
mean, if you go on the auditor's website, they do have all their petition ditches shown on there now, where you can click on, you can see all the ditches, because there's a couple over by Val Film, up in that area, but yeah, those three that you just identified are pretty much our main, storm drainage ditches that we use to get to Blanchard. for the,
Besides Lye Creek and Eagle Creek.
Right, right,
Those are
but
two
yeah.
huge ones too, yeah.
right.
Do they consider the creeks, do they consider that, is that managed under the same ditch language or code? Is there a cleaning of the creeks that would be handled?
I believe the creek, like Eagle Creek, Lye, and Blanchard is through soil and water
'Cause
for them
they're
to
bigger.
for them to maintain. So that's where, you know, these ditches fall into something different than soil and water.
Yeah, because all of a sudden, if you say it's the Blanchard, I don't think our stormwater fund can handle that liability. And then that rolls into the next question. If ARPA funds aren't available, it's, yeah, go.
Okay, sorry. So Howard Run, so if we do this, and there's this maintenance fee going to the county, I mean, so this will never come back to the city? I mean, 10 years from now, it gets overgrown again, whatever, and I mean, the maintenance fund is gonna take care of that, and it'll never come back to the city for more money? Is it a one-time deal?
From what I understand on petition ditches, now that this is petition, that, like, this is their responsibility to maintain as a
Okay.
ditch. So it's kind of a public ditch now that they have to make
Okay.
sure they.
So it's a
maintain.
one-time deal?
It'd be like a storm sewer pipe, but it's open, it's an open channel.
Okay. I just wanna make sure, so it's a one-time expense to the city?
I don't know about one-time expense. I
Okay.
can't say that for sure.
Okay,
But having a big, you know, $500,000 project towards it, I wouldn't see it. It might be, there might be a maintenance in additional years, but I couldn't tell you for sure.
okay.
That was, with Dazel, that was my understanding. It was get it done this one time, and there was gonna be, regular maintenance that the county had to take care of. It was their responsibility, and that was one of the, that was one of the, pushes to get it done.
Mhm.
So
I
then,
think-
go.
I think the maintenance is the important part.
Talk into the,
I think the maintenance is the important part of keeping this going, because I think that's what's happened with Oil Ditch. There's been absolutely no maintenance on Oil Ditch for as long as, even when I was working for the city years and years ago, there's been no maintenance on that. So I think once you keep up with some of the maintenance on the ditches, I think you're gonna see a lot better performing ditches and a lot less flooding and stuff, you know,
Yeah,
because
I
of
mean,
that.
it has a ripple effect through. If
Yeah.
the water has nowhere to go, backs up in our pipes, and it just keeps to it.
Sure.
so then, the next, question is assuming you don't have ARPA funding, is this something we can, use stormwater funding for, the stormwater fund
It
for?
would be a stormwater function, yeah, that we would, if we didn't have the ARPA funds, we would have to use. funds.
And then what's our capacity out of that fund to handle?
Not the greatest. I mean, it doesn't get a lot of revenue coming in. It is fairly low. You know, with storm projects and stuff, 2 of them, I can wipe out close to $1 million pretty quick on, you know, the size of it. Say, one project's going to be in your $500,000 range. So, you know, throwing another $500,000 on it, then we would have to do planning to make sure that we can continue on with storm projects or
Well,
look at other avenues.
And I think that's something else you gotta keep in mind, coming with a long-term control plan, we don't know what they're gonna require us to do. I mean, we may be spending money on that instead of being able to spend money on ditches, because we don't know what those projects are gonna be, so that fund could be taxed quite a bit.
Yeah, and that's what, you know, and not to get ahead, but in the pro formas and stuff, we went through capital. The numbers that I came from with capital, even though we don't have the projects identified or anything like that, I had a long-term control plan to begin with. So we were going through there, and I kind of used those as a baseline to go off of for future years. And yeah, it, like you were saying, it does, in the upcoming years, if we have that amount of projects that are going to be coming up because the long-term control plan is going to be taxed.
But I thought long-term control is all stormwater?
It's the combination system, so it depends on what system you're working on what funds we're going to be using for it. So a lot of it is probably going to be sanitary, but depending on how the function is at the end and what it is, storm funds are going to trickle into it too. So it's going to be between storm and sewer. Majority is going to be sewer, because you're separating your sanitary from your storm, but there's going to be some functions where we find storm lines that need rerouted because of how they're functioning.
And I know we have pro formas later in the agenda, but what is the revenue source for the stormwater fund? Is it do we bill based on a size of the property,
$6.
or is it a raw flat fee? I just don't recall my bill off the.
Yeah, it's for residential, it's a flat fee of what, $3? And then you get into your acreage of your lot. But there's a lot there. We have variable special cases, that include like condo associations, duplexes, triplexes, and stuff like that. But it depends on what your lot size is. It doesn't go by what your permeable, it's just your lot size.
So Oil Ditch comes in here and wants a similar $300,000. I don't see in our stormwater fund that we have the capability to handle that. So we're in essence going to say, recommend the council, right? The direction we seem to be going is that we think that council should take on the city should take on additional liability, and it would be the responsibility of the stormwater fund to do so. But the stormwater fund doesn't have the revenue to take this on. And we kind of kick that conversation down the road because we have ARPA dollars right now to handle it. Cool.
How
Good.
soon would oil come? I mean, it's like this next calendar year?
We don't know because it's in litigation about the easements and so forth. So we've been pushing to get that done since I've been here and before I've been here to actually get that done. We have money appropriated in a project for Oil Ditch, but it has to, they have to resolve the litigation before they can actually proceed. So we don't know that answer.
You say you have funding set aside. So is what Grant's saying, is that accurate, that we cannot, the current storm sewer fund cannot support Oil Creek?
So we appropriated 160,000 towards Oil Ditch.
Well, okay,
That was
160.
last year, 2 years ago, or something like that.
Where did you appropriate it from? Because I don't think it came.
questions are here.
Well, I'm a council member and I was on it, and Dazzle Ditch, I don't believe it came from stormwater. It was a capital project, and then afterwards, the properties had an assessment of like $2 per property card to maintain it going forward. That part has not been determined in that letter that went out for this ditch. So we should know where Dazzle money came from 10 years ago before we start talking about storm.
So the Oil Ditch, we pulled that, what I was discussing was the Oil Ditch, I believe it was 160,000 was appropriated from storm on that, and that was year or two. I can't remember the exact date, but I do have that book.
Yeah, and alternatively, if you don't do it out of storm, you do it out of it's a capital project. So
Yeah, it will
Yeah,
have a
it's not
project, it has
two
project
source.
numbers and stuff, so it'd be
Okay, so you
identified
can
as
do
a
that out of
project,
capital.
as a capital project.
Okay, so,
other questions or comments or discussion?
no.
So talking through a recommendation, some of the things I heard was that Dan mentioned he thought we should be clean on the city, inside the city, outside the city splits, be it with the maintenance and the assessments. So just thoughts from the committee on that point, and I'll start. That makes sense to me.
Yeah, I concur with Dan on that as well. It should be separate from the city and the county. We cover our share, they cover theirs.
Yeah, I guess, I mean, I agree with that also.
Okay. We also talked about wanting an MOU written and approved in advance of any transfer of money. That seems like a pretty big no-brainer. And the whole and then so there would be an adjustment to the appropriation based on the inside the city, outside the city, and you gave that a different number of.
Yeah, so if we just do everything that's within the city limits, or city citizens and within city limits, 301,613.21 cents.
So you would ask for 301,614.
1314, yeah.
You don't, and you don't do a 20% over anything like that.
No,
Okay.
yeah, no, that's from their estimates that they're generating.
Okay. There was some earlier. There was some concern about discussion about prevailing wage.
Yeah, so it will kick in prevailing wage, but talking with them, they said they are not going to change their estimate with that because they believe everyone that's going to be bidding on this project anyways, with the pricing and stuff, is already prevailing wage county.
Okay, help me get this into a recommendation. So it sounds like we recommend allocation of $301,614.
Right.
To cover the assessment.
And the maintenance inside city limits.
Honest. And that, so allocation of 301,614 to cover assessment and maintenance costs inside the city limits, and then at the
Contingent upon a MOU.
be executed prior to,
Prior to fund transfer.
okay. So I will recommend, or I will motion that we recommend allocation of $301,614 to cover assessment and maintenance costs inside the city limits, and a MOU be executed prior to transfer of funds.
A second?
Second, we have a motion and a second discussion on the motion. You okay with your thoughts on, are we, you've had the discussions with the county. Is this gonna ruffle, is this a step forward, or are we muddy in the soup?
No, I mean, it can be done the way you guys have it worded. From their side, because they get all the complaints, they get all calls. They're saying, we got a lot of calls from people on the north end of the watershed for that, but they didn't say you absolutely can't do it. It's just a couple more formulas they got to change to make it work. So what you guys are proposing can be done.
Yeah, I mean, I believe, I wouldn't think that the charges within the city would be on an individual property owner would be too significant, just simply because the watershed area just isn't big enough.
Yeah, the inside the city, like from what they're saying, it's not at large charges. When you get outside and you're owning hundreds of acres
Yeah.
of farm ground and you're part of this watershed, that's
Yeah.
where you're going to see significant costs.
Yeah. And we're okay with money continuing to come from ARPA. I think in this case, that makes sense, and I don't know that we need to make any recommendation one way or the other to change that. That's just convenient.
Yeah.
And well-timed.
Okay.
Any other comments or discussion? All in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
4 ayes. So that is a path forward. Thanks, guys.
All right.
The next one, we continue discussion about extending sanitary sewers to properties within city limits that are on septic systems. At our last meeting, we kind of mentioned that we thought there was in the range of 30 properties. I wondered if you all had a chance to do any more investigation into that.
So what we have is the map of the individuals that we feel are water only. And like we said last time, really, without going door to door, we might not know the accuracy of that number. So what we've done is drafted a letter for the residents that are actually water only, and we'd like to send that out to those individuals and see if we can actually engage them in the conversation of confirming that they are water only, and then engage the health department to have that conversation with them about the situation. So that's pretty much where we're at with that.
I missed the very beginning of that. What was
Well-
what was the number of?
We
Did
had
you have a number?
Is it 30?
It's between 30 and 50.
So it's approximately between 30 and
Okay.
50.
All right.
So
Okay.
So you're going to send out 30 letters or 50?
well, we have
Somewhere in
we
there.
have the spreadsheet.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, all I have with me right now is the map with the data points. So the individuals that are listed as water only, regardless of what that number is going to get this letter.
And there's no rhyme or reason geographically where they exist.
That's correct.
Jeremy, if you, looking at the map, are each one of these things going to present an interesting challenge to extend sanitary to, or vis-a-vis that one on Lima Avenue, or are they ones that we just simply need to give it the proper attention?
Looking at these locations and, what the development in that area, around the area, most likely the reason why they're not on a sanitary, or because they're not on our system and they're on a septic, is they couldn't get to them at that time. So that a lot of these, especially down on the, the southern side, we're going to run into great issues. We're vertically challenged in Ohio, so trying to get grade with anything and meeting standards and stuff. So a lot of these is going to be, we're going to run into where we can't get a gravity sewer, and then you guys start talking about, to the homeowner, who puts in the lift station, who's in charge of the lift station, all that kind of stuff, which is an added cost.
Because, previously we were kind of theoretical on this. Once you start putting costs at some point in time, you say you're better off staying on a sanitary, or on a septic, excuse me. When we look at doing any kind of road projects, do you keep things like this in mind to say, gosh, we're going to rip up this road, this is a good time to, before we do that, to do sanitary projects?
So yeah, as we go through our road resurfacing, we give the department heads a list of 30 streets, of potential streets. We go through there, we find out their potential problems that could be coming up there, so that way we can kick the streets off. But yeah, those are part of our process on deciding on what streets we're resurfacing and stuff. That's part of our process to figure out what is needing replaced. Is there anything that needs extended? Do we need to do anything with the storm in that area? A lot of times, plumbing, gas and stuff, we try to reach out with them, but anytime you have a broken gas main, water main, and stuff like that, that is part of our process to extend those, or try to see if that is something that would be a valuable project to do.
And then talking to Lindsay Summit from the Hancock Public Health Department, having conversations about including our 10-year capital plan with sewer projects, having these on the radar instead of going in next month and saying, you're enforcing this, but if we can do it with projects, road projects and sanitary extensions, we can connect these as we go. They're informed on where these are. They're having the conversations about the safety and the effectiveness of the septic currently. They're dealing with those individuals, those property owners. But as we're working through our capital plan, we're communicating with them, hey, we're gonna be here or in this area, does this make sense? So that was a conversation I had with Hancock Public Health last week, that we can better communicate on the front end, so then we can plan and communicate with those individuals to eliminate or prevent some of the situations we dealt with on Blue Bonnet and Bittersweet, where a couple years prior, they put in brand new systems or just had theirs, rehabbed and had this significant cost, and now they're put in this position that they have to connect. So trying to prevent those situations in the future.
So are there like clusters that, when you look at the map, I mean, like you put a lift station and you could pick up a half a dozen houses, or they're just onesie twosies all over? I mean, a little both probably.
I mean,
But
there's
are there
some
clusters?
locations where you could pick up, if you had to put in a lift station. But then, you go into, those aren't cheap, and
Yeah.
it's a moving part that it's going to break at some point. So,
Yeah.
it's a continuing adding cost for that.
Yeah.
So you want to try to avoid any kind of lift station or force main as much as possible. So that is something, but that would have to, work out on whose responsibility is it.
Yeah.
Are we going to take it? Homeowner, how's that work? There's a lot of variables with that.
Well, I would say we should continue with the letters. Let's get the data, and, there'll be some easy ones that we should try to clean up, but there's gonna be some very difficult, expensive ones, and we'll figure that out later. I mean,
To Rob, to your point, I think that's really what I'm going towards, is that we're proactively working with folks in these situations and give them that hopefully the letters helps them say, before I do that upgrade, a contact to the city and do something that makes it easy for them to contact and ask if there are projects and potentially that influences where projects might potentially happen also. I mean, that's one of the inputs. But you're trying to proactively solve an issue versus force somebody away from a septic system that is working properly. I know in the example that actually brought this to my mind, there's development opportunity if we ran sanitary. We have lots that could be infill developed, but are not right now because of lack of sanitary. So it's not for a nefarious reason. It's for an overall good reason. Of course, there's a lot of roads paved of good intention that turns in bad a couple years down the road. So, I mean, it sounds like the only really action is to recommend continuing with the process to contact individual property owners via letter and having those conversations. Is that?
that health department has like that 2-year rule, like once it's identified. I think that's really tight.
But it's a 2-year rule once it's right in front of you.
Okay.
It's so technically for these properties, one would think that there's not sanitary around, and as the health department has said numerous times, they don't have the bandwidth
Yeah.
to enforce the rule, even if it exists in Ohio Administrative Code.
Yeah.
But I concur. I think
Yeah.
that rule is silly, but that's a conversation for Mr. Cross and Mr. McCauley.
Yeah, okay.
What are we recommending?
Well, I think we're just recommending just continue with the letters. Let's collect the data, start the conversations.
Yep, excuse me, we will prepare the letters and get those sent and continue
Yeah.
down this course.
Yeah.
Bring you information as we collect it.
Okay. That's not a quick process, probably. I mean, you're going to get a lot of non-response, you know, and
Yeah,
Yeah.
even with some of these other situations that we've reached out to citizens via letter or whatnot,
Yeah.
it's, some are very responsive,
Yeah.
some are not.
I mean,
Maybe
just-
it might
just in
take a
West
second
Park.
letter, might take knocking on the door.
yeah. I mean,
So-
just in West Park, when Brian and I went door to door, that was not, you know, they don't answer their door. I mean,
Yeah.
that's just. you
We're
know.
experienced, that was an example, and then the elevation situation we've been dealing
Oh,
with, I mean, that was
sure.
another one that we've,
Yeah,
you know, it took some time.
Sure.
We're there, but it took us
sure.
more than just sending a letter.
Okay.
So I will motion, I motion that we continue by sending letters to identified property owners and continue to gather data. We have a motion and a second. Discussion.
Can you repeat that motion again?
Continue by sending letters to identified property owners and continue to gather data.
I'm good now.
Other questions or comments? All in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Hi.
That's 4 ayes, so we will consider that one done. Policies and procedures for instituting utility billing rate changes. I sent out last night the revised language. I think it was, this one was specifically for water, and wondering if folks had a chance to review, questions, comments.
I have a question. No, this is for water. No, we're gonna have a similar document for storm and sanitary? Or-
Yeah, yes.
Okay.
I think that
okay.
was, I think that was the original intent.
Okay. Okay. I just had some minor edits, but we can get those to you later.
Rob, did you have a chance to take a look?
I'm sorry, I'm pulling it up right now.
Take that as a no. Rest of the committee. So the, you know, the big ads were moving extending the period of time for when we would do the review to being third quarter. And we had this prior to the second meeting in September, saying we really wanted to have a recommendation to council in September. I'm not sure if we consider that still necessary or not, just having it done in third quarter. I mean, the second meeting in September had come from previous discussions. So that was one change. We talked about adding the 10 years for the pro forma, and I tried to explain what the definition of 10 years would be with a little example. And so my expectation would have been that we would have seen the pro formas presented would have been the years 25 through 35. That's 10 years. We did the ones we have, I think, are through 2033. That's kind of a minor thing. What I really wanted to do is, what I think it's appropriate is to match the 10-year capital plan. So whatever the 10-year capital plan says is 10 years is what we say is 10 years. And I can change the language to mimic, to say it matches the 10-year capital plan outlook.
I would agree with it, aligning with the 10-year capital plan, whatever language that we can come up with that make that, but that makes complete sense. It's a rolling 10 years. In, back to the, when we will evaluate this on an annual basis, or bring it to water and sewer, I know we said Q3, and we also said September. I think regardless of where that is, the most important thing would be before budgets. And we're getting ready to kick that off here the first week of October. So to understand what the revenues would be based on expenses, et cetera, those are the decision points. So we need to have this conversation now on an annual basis, so we can then take that recommendation. Even though on an annual basis, you'll see here in a little bit, you're gonna see the lead time necessary to make a change or a recommendation to a change, so.
Well, I know we moved later, we didn't say Q2, for example, because we wanted to give rate changes the opportunity to start having a revenue effect in essence.
Correct.
So are we safe to leave it as Q3? That gives you July, August, September.
I believe, personally, I believe so, because I
Okay.
know I have a responsibility to have this prepared to do the operating budget for the next year, and that timeline doesn't change. It's pretty regimented.
So Grant, are you proposing to scratch this prior to the second council meeting in September?
Yes,
Oh, you're gonna scratch that?
yes.
Third quarter of the year period, okay.
Added some language to, that defines the statutory authority to raise the rates. In this case, it's, just through the Ohio Revised Code, but saying that, in this case, it's Service Safety Director, the process is we make a recommendation to full council makes a recommendation to the Service Safety Director, and I would imagine that's by adopting the committee report, and that the Service Safety Director then takes that as input. And kind of the way I would see that is if it goes against it, if I'm on council, my expectation is I would hear the reasons why. But ultimately, he has the authority to do it. So, and then the last thing was we had talked about the having a third party conduct detailed rate analysis, and we were talking about what the timing of that should be based on the cost, and we really kind of didn't settle on anything. The most I heard was that every 5 years. But then there was concern if the cost if the cost didn't justify it, and so my thought on that is that it's every 5 years, unless you can extend it with support of Water and Sewer Committee and full council. So Water and Sewer Committee makes a recommendation to full council to extend the timeline. Full council accepts committee report, and then you don't have to do the 5 year until whatever time. But at least it's putting it into the we're at least saying that that's part of the process.
I was good with the wording, Grant. I think it gives us an out. You can push it out if you need to. And I think it's gonna come down to what our comfort level is with this workbook, right? I mean, going through these, and if we're comfortable, then maybe we'll never have a 5 year or an outside party review, but.
Yes, we will.
Yeah. Well, okay, fair enough, but I'm okay, I'm okay with the wording in here.
So and Dan, you had mentioned you have some edits. Is it more or less wordsmithing?
Well, you had a couple things, a lot of and/ors, like recommended rate adjustments and continuation. You can't have a rate adjustment and continuation of current water rates, so it's
Well,
just
it's
or. It's a recommended rate adjustment or continuation of current water rates, but it's
Okay.
not and/or.
Yeah. Okay. So some wordsmithing.
Yeah, there's two places there's, I would take the and out. And then at the very, maybe the second sentence, Jerry, when you're doing these and you're gonna start projecting, you might know of a big customer, industrial or the community, whatever. I mean, that you would put into the pro forma, right? I mean, that was something that we would be looking forward. So in that second, so revenue produced from all current and prospective water-specific services. I was just gonna add current and prospective water-specific services. Because you might have prospects, right, that you would be adding. So that was my only comment. Grant.
So in that first bullet item?
No, it's the very first paragraph.
Oh.
The second sentence at the top. The analysis will include an inclusive look at operational expenses, capital demands, and revenue produced from all current and prospective water-specific services.
Okay.
The language, I mean, other than a few wordsmiths like that, it looks good. It aligns with what we've been discussing, in my opinion. So I feel it's reasonable. I think it's actionable. We can maintain that. I think it's the right cadence. I think what we envision with this master plan that we're gonna end up getting done, is it's getting ready to get bid out, is that would be our first, the number analysis would be included in that. The first one, that third party, because they can do that, and then recommendations and so forth. So I think that would be our first validation, a third-party validation, and then that 5-year cadence based on
Okay.
whatever that cadence looks like, but I think that 5-year makes sense.
I would thought that the master plan is I thought that was a detailed analysis of the plant and what the plant's gonna look like over the next.
Yeah, it is, but as part of that, I mean, just like the long-term control plan, they gotta have a financial analysis on
Cost associated.
what our, next 10 to 20 years is gonna look like and how we can fund it with our revenue stream right now. So it's not gonna be a full rate study for each one, but as part of that, they're gonna have to see they're gonna open the books on what our capital plan looks like, what they're expecting the capital plan to be, and what our revenues to see if we can fund this, how we can fund it, and stuff like that. So it will be pretty much wrapped up in it as part of that.
Yes.
Okay. With an agreement on the language with just some wordsmithing, the next step is for Mr. Martin and I to put these into the water and the sewer rules specifically, and then we would have a set of revised water and sewer rules for us to approve. So and from a so then that would have specific language to where the authority is to raise sewer and stormwater rates also. So that's our next step in this. But in essence, we have the charge we were given by council, which was to set up a process to review rates on an annual basis. We have the framework of it, and our next item is going to be the first step of exercising that framework. I think it's we've completed what we were set out, what we were tasked to do.
Okay.
So the recommendation is clean up language. In the water rate review process document and incorporate into the yeah. Is it water and sewer regulations is it sewer, water rules and sewer rules?
Sewer rules and regulations.
There's stormwater regulations separate.
Those are part of sewer, aren't they? So my motion is that we recommend to clean up language in the water rate review process document and incorporate into the water rules and sewer rules.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Palmer. We have a motion and a second. Comments? Questions? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
That is done. Now to actually see how this actually works, I will toss it over to you guys to take us on the next one.
Yeah, so I'll just kind of walk you down from the top. So our 23, we were able to, those are pretty much hard numbers that we were able to obtain from that. So looking at that, what we're doing is we know our operating revenues from that. So we know what our operating rate was for 23. That is what is plugged in for up in that area. 24 and on, we were able to project of what we're bringing in right now, going off of historical data to get up what these numbers are up here. So that's where you see that 12.7. From that, then we're going down into our operating expense, and I split our expenses up into two different things. I have our operating budget and then our capital expense. So that way we can really see how each one is affected through there. And then within our operating and maintenance expense, I actually broke up each department within there, because a lot of that, then you can start seeing how each department, if they fluctuate one way or another, you can see how that kind of had a ripple effect all the way across there. So we have those broken out through there. It's just the simple, what you guys are going to be seeing in the budget hearings as well. Those are kind of the same numbers that we're flowing along with that as well. The debt service, that's everything that's within capital. That's what the numbers that we have attained from the auditor's office on what we have currently right now for debt service. To keep kind of the same as what we have done when we have shown you guys, we kind of discussed, I still kept that $500,000 in there for future, which is in 29, because in 28, we're pretty much going to be debt free within the water. So I kept that as a constant all the way through there as what we had when we were doing the water rate discussion. So that way there wasn't one different than another. We're following along right with that. Going down into the working capital expenses. So this is where you're going to get into our capital improvement projections or projects. So we were able to currently pull what was in 23, what we spent in capital projects, and then this is currently what we have spent so far, and we have projections of what we're going to be spending in the future. So we have additional water lines that will be coming out, and then also the master plan is all wrapped up within that. So we have a pretty good projection of what our capital projection is going to be with that. Then just to sum it up, so that way you can kind of take a quick look of what our expenses are. I just had the total operating expense and total capital expense down here, which then leads you down into what your water fund balance is. So from the water fund that we have, what we had previously, so this is pretty much the fund that you're going to start the previous year. So that 5.9 million is what we started the 24 fiscal year with. I had it as two lines. I can add it back in, but it just seemed confusing because you've seen the number twice. So I figure I keep it down at the bottom, and what that does is that will follow back up to when we do all the calculations down through here, that follows along. So if we do everything that we're expecting with capital and say we use our operating expense, the fund balance that we're going to be giving back at the end of the year, still use that $750,000 that we used as part of our rate discussion. Why 24 is up a little bit is because we had that 900,000 come back from Project Hat Trick. So that's what that's included within there as well. But with what the projects we have, say we spent all those with the projects at the end of the year, then we would expect our end of year balance for 24 and our start of year for 25 would be the $5.1 million on that. And then following along with that, I also wanted to include, because this is an EPA regulated because of minimum reserves, what they're saying, like we just discussed before, they said we got to have 3 months of operating expense with that. So I held that constant for 23 as what we see in 24. But then as you can see right here, I started looking into seeing what 3 months of our operating from what we're showing up there and what we're projecting, what that actual minimum reserve needs to be, and we're pretty far behind on that. So once we get out so far, I started just rounding up. That was roughly 2.98. This was 3.08 something. So I just round up to 3 million on that going through. But as we were going through, we kind of start building in that buffer, like what we talked about for future projects. So that way we're not just at the minimum reserve. We have those, because we're going to have our plant here in a couple of years. It's going to be 100 years old. That we need to, it's going to be needing major improvements. There's more regulations coming out, so we want to make sure we have that fund built within there. So that's what that is across there. As you can kind of see at the bottom with the minimum reserves, yes, we did up it, but that is kind of 3 months with that. We can kind of, like what we talked about before, we're going to have those discussions in 27, 28, 29 on what those rates look like. But a lot of these capital plan is going to change with that long-term master plan. Thank you. I'm mixing two projects up, but the master plan with that. So we're going to be seeing a lot with that. Those capital numbers could be going up, but what we have in capital right now, which we have seen through the 10 years, and it's kind of all flown along what we were expecting. That 28, 29 zone is where we need to start talking, possibly if we don't have a big easier come in or something like that to help kick it up, for that, where we're still seeing that rate going back down, where we're going to start passing.
Let's look at the capital line if we could. So it really drops off. I mean, you're at 4 million last year, 4 million this year, and then it's going to half that next year, and you're going from 4 million to 2 million to
why these numbers over in here, and I wish I could drag that so I could see, but in the 29 and 30, but if you see over in here in our 31 time zone, it goes back up to 4.7. So what we were doing is we were lowering our projects within the prior year, so that way we can build up, because that was a large, and I don't have the capital book, but it was I was going to say it was SCU, or there was some lime press that's included with that. So as we're planning through, we've seen some projects that we got to push that one along. That one can actually be pushed a little bit longer. We had this big one coming up, and we know in the 30, 31 zone that where we have to start moving on that, going with it. So that's why the numbers go down. But if you bump those capital numbers back up, then that's just going to shift that red line at the bottom. Closer.
Is the capital lines directly from the 10-year capital plan?
Yes.
Okay.
So, back in November when you presented the rate increase, you identified like $50 million of capital projects over some. Is that 50 million in here? Is that consistent?
Not to speak, but so what we had, like I said, we have all these correlating together. We have what what we talked, the capital plan and all that kind correlating. Now, the capital plan, we did have to do some shifting around because we seen where our fund balance was, and we had to move some projects up. We had some, like we talked about earlier today, we had at the treatment plant, we had that additional 160,000. We weren't expecting that, but all those, to answer that, all that is flowing together, and it's the same thing with sanitary and storm and all that kind of stuff. You can look at the capital book and see the same numbers that you're going to be seeing over here.
I'm trying to figure, is there debt? Are you looking at, taking on debt?
Yeah, so we just had a placeholder of
Oh,
debt. in-
500,000.
Yeah, in 29, and that was just
Okay.
from the discussions we had, I believe, at one of the water and sewer committee or committee of the whole meetings. That's not a for sure, but, we do
Yeah.
roll off debt in the 28 time zone where we're expecting, okay, we would be taking something on
Yeah.
as part of that. Not saying we wouldn't do it sooner, later,
Yeah.
whatever, just, but again, wanted to have that constant flow through our document.
But
but-
it's, I
but
guess the
here-
point
but-
is just in addition to the capital spending, we're showing another $500,000 of
Correct.
debt capital
Correct.
spending.
That's
Okay.
all calculated within.
So, yeah, so there's 500,000 of capital debt, but where is the capital revenue? I mean, obviously, the capital debt is to pay for something. What is it?
So we have the debt wrapped up into the operating expense because that is an expense we're going to be paying every single year. So that's why I have the debt wrapped up into our operating expense, because that's day one of January. That's when that payment will be going out for those. So I included with that because that's a variable that pretty much is going to be staying the same. I know our operating can change a little bit, but the capital expenses and the operating expenses is all coming from the water fund. So it's a little different than what the general fund, like capital funds, where you have the general fund and you appropriate down into the capital. The water funds is all coming from the water fund
Yeah.
itself. So any effect that you have with the debt or the capital is still going to affect your bottom dollar with that.
So what's the inflation assumption in this?
So with the operating costs, we have 3% going all the way across there. The revenues, like what we did in the rate discussion, we pretty much flatlined that because historically we have shown that it's fluctuated. I think it was less than 1% or less than 0.1%. It was pretty well flat across there. So we had that going through there, but like what you were saying earlier, we are going to have some companies come in. I know we got sheets coming up, but they're still working on final numbers or what their numbers are going to be. So I didn't want to assume it's X amount and it's only going to come in this or vice versa. So as soon as we get those numbers from them, I'll be able to go to Jason and say, hey, they're expecting X amount of millions of gallons a day, hopefully, or a year, whatever. But we can say that this is what we're expecting. What's that going to look like to our sanitary and our water rate? So then we can look at that and say, okay, in 26 they're going to be operational, or 25 they're going to be operational. This is where we're going to plug in the number. But they're still working through their final numbers, so that's why you don't see it at this time. But that is something, as soon as we get pretty firm numbers from them, we'll include that.
So our water consumption is pretty steady, year to year to year.
Yeah, more than from, I think we pulled data from, over 10 years of data. It fluctuates a little bit over there, but if you look at the average across there, it pretty much
It's
flat.
pretty tight. That was one of my, okay.
We're not projecting population growth. I mean, so
No.
Not, yeah. And those aren't, you get the population growth, you get some, but that's not your big users. It's, when you get your bigger users, that's
Industrial,
where you're going to
yeah.
see the jump in that
Yeah.
graph.
What would North Baltimore do adding North Baltimore as a customer do to this?
It's going to move the needle it's going to move it up, but it then depends on how much water they consume a day as well. If you go from a half or 500,000 gallons a day to 1 million gallons a day, we're not sure what their numbers look like, what
Yeah.
they could be projecting, what they are expecting from us, but yeah, if you pull in something like that, that would be almost if you want to say a large industry,
Yeah.
more or less.
Right.
What
With
I'm-
very little cost, actually, right?
Well,
I mean,
actually-
So the capital will be paid by them.
Correct.
Right, so there's no capital cost.
The connection would be for them to complete.
Right.
And my understanding is, what Jason's explained in the past, the dumping of water at the dead end at the north side of our system to maintain flow is actually the volume that would be able to be sold to that community if that came to fruition. So it's actually, we're wasting that water.
It really doesn't
For a
tax.
need, for flow,
Sure.
right? For flow, and then we actually have a sanitary up there that doesn't have a large flow, so we need, it's a benefit. We're using it to actually
Yeah.
move,
So if you
what's the
started,
right?
It's a flusher.
So we're using it for something. It's just not going into the
yeah,
ditch. However, it's also an opportunity to continue the flow of the system, reducing the stagnant water. Obviously we don't want that, but it could be sold to a customer, which
so
is a
if we
benefit.
sell it, then you lose your flushing water. Is that a problem?
Go ahead.
The short version, Jason.
Short version is we'd work with water pollution control and get the exact amount they would need.
Okay.
And because right now, the water department dictates the amount that we dump to make sure that we keep our TTHM levels and our chlorine residuals at
Yeah.
the right level.
Sure.
So we'd work with
Yeah.
their staff and lower that amount.
Yeah.
And I do believe that the wastewater portion of that, they do add a chemical out there also to help with this. So, there could be some chemical savings also if we're not wasting that much, so. It's,
Back to the model, the one thing I noticed, and I just look at the total revenue and expense figures, is that revenues don't match expenses in '24. They don't match them in '25. They don't match them in '26. They don't match them in '27, '28. They never match them. So we're not covering our costs. So,
Is that right?
well, I'm just, all I did is,
Help me with that. So
I just shrunk,
Yeah, so, you
shrunk
know,
it and looked at the revenue and expense figures.
Oh.
And that was one of the things that,
Oh, yeah.
when we were putting this together, we were kind of discussing that. And one of the big difference between what was presented originally and to what is on here is we know what our true operating cost was for the end of '23. We know what was budgeted for '24 and '25. Well, in between that time, we had our chemicals being bid out, and that shot up, 30 or 40% within that. So our operating costs went higher than what we were expecting when we had these conversations. What was it, September or October last year on this? But that's where our big thing with that is, because our operating costs shot up on that. So then, if you keep adding 3% every year with compounding through there, it's going to escalate pretty quick on that.
So why isn't there a rate increase for '25? I mean, this thing shows no revenue change. At some point in time, you've got to, we're either going to add customers, or there's got to be another rate change. Because right now, we're saying in '29, we're really broke. We're doing last year again in '28. And one of the discussions was, now in hindsight, should we have been raising rates a small amount each year? And so I look at this and wonder, I don't personally want to pay more for water, but I also don't want a broke, I don't want an insolvent water fund.
Well, that's really the conversation that needs to be had. Presenting the numbers the way we're evaluating them. I think with the change that we've had this year, understanding that we have the master plan that's coming, if the decision by the committee or the recommendation is to do it sooner, I mean, that's for the discussion to be had. But I also feel that there's still some unknown variables in between now and where we show red that I think we should know more before we make an abrupt change.
Yeah.
And we've discussed them already, the master plan, understanding what that's going to be. And that's a year to 18-month process to actually have that. That will actually truly identify, hey, these are the projects that need to get done. There's the priority level, and here's the rates associated based on your current financial health to get you where you need to be. The other is some of the larger consumers that we've talked about, either industry or neighboring communities. Those could move those needles. So, again, the recommendation, we're presenting the numbers. My recommendation at this point was let it set as is. Let us see what the revenues are through '24, and we'll evaluate this in '25. We have time to make an adjustment if, at that point, we might have new information from the master plan, maybe a community that is interested in becoming a customer of ours, maybe two, we don't know that. So I think there's quite a few unknowns that might move those needles in the next couple years. We're in a position that we can continue to operate for the next couple years before we'd have to make that rate change. But I personally, there's that balance between, being accused of stockpiling money or having a slow cadence, waiting until you really have to make that large adjustment, which obviously we all experienced that over the last couple of years, versus that slow, gradual where it's less noticeable. And that's the debate for you all to have. Not to pass, but the recommendation is just there with the numbers.
If we wait for the capital plan, we're out 2 more years. That seems like, right? It'd be 2 years from today.
Yeah, so if we had the master plan started in '25, it would be finished in '26 at some point, and then the recommendation change would be '27, yes.
I mean, to look at this, and I agree with what Grant's saying. You can see where our expenses is outweighing our revenue on that. And to kind of echo what Rob is saying too, our 24, this 12.7 is still, is still projection. Yeah, we got 8 months, but 3 of those months were also from the old rate. So we still got some data that we got come in to see. This is, we feel pretty confident about that projection of what we're seeing. But I think to see what a hard number is coming in on that, we'll be able to tell, because, who knows, this could come in as a 13 or it could come in as 12 flat. So I think that seeing that true number on an actual for 24, looking at, we're going to be sending out chemical bids this year, or here, the next couple weeks. So we'll be able to tell what our chemicals are going to be looking at, which is going to have an effect on our operating costs through there as well.
How many years out would they be bidding the chemical? Is that just a 1 year?
So we bid it each year, but then we can do 2 extensions, or we can renew it twice.
Okay,
So then every 3 years, every chemical is bid out.
yeah. Well, I'm not in favor of changing rates at this point, and personally, but I think we need some more information, so I'm okay with leaving it as is for now.
And I guess with this, not to cut in, but with this document that we have, I think one of the main things I would like to know is what else would you guys like to see? What information? Is there anything else to help, as if we presented this to you guys as we're talking through stuff, to help you kind of see what we're seeing as well. So if we could get some feedback on that too, is what you guys would like to see, that good as well.
I do have one more question on the capital. Let's see, the debt service. So you're saying, like, looking 29 on, is that you have that $500,000 plug number? Okay, so that is the cost, that's the service, but I mean, how much capital does that get you? The 500 grand is your annual payment, and how much, right?
I couldn't tell you how much, that would be a conversation we would have to have with, because where the current rate is, all that kind of stuff. That is something, that Andrew from.
I'm just wondering if
that's
there's a
working with
bust.
the auditor's office could be.
Do you guys understand what I'm saying? I'm just wondering if there's a bust in this thing. So if the 500,000 is your debt service, that's your annual payment, but you got to be getting 10 million or something, right? I mean, some big number. So if you're So what, then do you have any capital spending down below? I'm not sure is that right in there?
I was wondering the same thing. You have an expense, but you have there's no positive on this, and I
think you need to improve, show us what the capital you're borrowing, and then show us the debt expense. You know,
Yeah.
you know,
because
Yeah, I think
because
there's still a problem.
The original idea of that behind it, if I recall, is, we wanted to have that in as the expense that was kind of expected from the long-term control plan.
Okay.
Those projects is what is really
Okay.
is being used.
But
to
show
pay
us
for that,
what-
because we don't know
yeah.
what those are
Yeah.
at this point.
right, but you have to show us how much capital that buys you, right? I mean,
Okay,
Yeah,
yeah.
so that
So-
number's gotta be somewhere.
At this time, since that's such an unknown, would you want that just removed?
No. You have to make an assumption what the interest rate's
Right.
gonna be.
Okay.
And no, you gotta,
Okay.
um,
I see what
because
you mean, yeah.
down below in your capital, you're expensing those capital projects every year. So there's no
Right, because
debt
that's
service.
just kind of our working
So,
capital.
okay. I think you just gotta improve the model right there.
So, just to clarify, based on the capital plan, excuse me, out to that point, take 3 or 4 large projects that would bundle up to a realistic debt
Yeah.
issuance, and then try to take an interest rate.
And show the line
and
items with
amortize
those.
that out
Yeah,
over.
and show the line items what those 3 projects are, kind of
Okay.
thing. And it's, $50 million,
Yes.
and that cost is 500,000 per year, something like that.
Okay,
Okay.
yep, we can clean that up.
Okay. It's a good model, though. I think you guys have done a good job. I mean, it's easy to understand, and
well, it's pretty easy to understand, and it kind of makes a myth out of the fact that we're sitting on a ton of money. That $5 million is a lot of money, but it goes quick unless you have. It's a buffer, but it goes quick.
Grant, I thought you made a good calculation, just taking that, the revenue minus the total expenses, and how do we do that? I mean, should that be a line item? Just
Well, that's just something you can just look and see.
yeah.
Well, that's what you can see the year-end balance, how that's kind of slowly dropping down through there. It's never flatlining or
Mm-hmm.
keeping up with itself.
Okay.
The only other thing I wonder if it would, this gives you a good overview, but numbers are percentages. A lot of this stuff makes adds value to I see you have your debt to revenue percentages, and I wonder if you have a more detailed view of this that's showing your operation and maintenance expense by you have the 4 teams there: treatment, distribution, reservoir, and utility billing. What's that as a percentage of those numbers? What's your operation expense percentage and I don't know if those change or if those are leading indicators, and I'm sure when you're looking at your details, you're looking at your people expense versus your chemicals and all that. You have your people expense versus everything else, and you're keeping track of that. I don't know that we need to see that level of detail for this discussion, but I would hope that you have that, and that serves as that's something that's also analyzed and looked at. Until you said that your operating revenues are relatively flat over a 10-year period, I would have been asking to see percentage differences from year to year, and how much more is 24 than 23 is what's my 3-year rolling average changes and things to that effect. But if it's relatively steady, the other thing, can you change assumptions like wage and inflation assumptions in this model dynamically, or are all these numbers kind of hand brought in from someplace else?
They're all brought in, especially, you know, our first 2 years are all brought in from what was approved through our budget. So, you know, I grabbed pretty much all these numbers through Munis, our accounting system. On, you know, if we have a wage increase or something like that, you know, we kind of talked about that, or, you know, any of those line items. We talked about that, of having another line up here or somewhere where we can calculate those, because, you know, who knows, say we have a wage, we got negotiations coming up, but we can reflect that through there and project something. So that is a discussion we had on how to show that kind of stuff. But having it all manipulated on there, I don't. It's just we pull the numbers from our accounting services.
I know with the creation of 3 of these things, we're going to turn you into an Excel captain, and your engineering skills are going to get rusty because you're going to be messing with spreadsheets all the time, and that's not the intent. That's a negative. So you don't want to create too much of a burden just to present these information. Even though I think the consolidation of this and the presentation has great value.
Yeah, I mean, I know it's a lot of plug and chug, but pulling the numbers simply off Munis, plugging them into here. I mean, once I have that document, I can copy and paste it over. It's pretty simple. Just because the operating, how many, you know, with salaries and stuff, how many people you have, how many hours they work, it's going to change what their rate is. So it would be a pretty big formula.
Let's look at the next one.
So they're all the same.
Which one's this?
They're all the same formatting. This is sewer.
This is sewer?
Yep, this is sewer. You know, like I discussed before, their capital in the next 26 on, I pretty much plugged in a lot of numbers that we had from the previous ones. So those capital numbers could go up, but you can see, you know, we have some pretty decent numbers going across there. Their revenues and stuff are pretty much, again, flatlined through there. Their operating costs are a little bit more. They don't have a little bit less. They don't have as much chemicals or anything that they're putting in there. But one of the biggest things they have is they've been debt free since 2023. Anyway, so they've been debt free. So right now they have no debt on there. I did not assume any debt. The only reason I did water is, like I said, because that was part of the discussion that we had as part of the rate discussion. But with that, they stay fairly well. But then, yeah, once you get down into these bigger years, that's where you start seeing it cut in pretty hard on that. But their revenues are still under their expenses, or they're exceeding. And what happens is, because of in that 26 time zone, is that capital budget is starting to get beefed, or almost 5 times what it normally is. But it gets moved up pretty well because of the long-term control projects. But part of that analysis, like I said, will be financial. They'll look at the next 10 to 20 years on that. They'll determine, okay, we see what your capital is. We see what your normal repairs are going to be for sanitary. Well, here's on top of it, what do you need to be? What's your rates look like? And stuff like that. So we'll be getting a lot of information for that next year or so.
With the 10-year capital plan being so relatively new, I know there's still a lot more. That planning will affect. We'll start seeing the detail in it here, as well as. I mean, that's why we're actually having you directing you to think out that way. And I know the long-term capital plan adds a lot to that. So these numbers become, the better your inputs, the better these numbers, or the
Right.
more accurate these numbers are. So that, but to your overall point, as currently stated, you're still revenue positive, and in 28, it's 29 when you go upside down. So you, for the next 5 years, which is close to an eternity, in this, it's in a lot better shape.
Right.
Is the minimum reserve same, is that EPA required 3-month? Is that
Yeah,
same?
that's
same
what
deal?
it is. On that, I did not drag that across because I couldn't find for sure what that was, so I didn't want to make an assumption on that. But I know those were, along with the storm too, those were all set, I believe, through the EPA on that as well.
But this should escalate too, right?
Yeah, it should. I just didn't drag it across
Okay.
because I wanted to for sure check that before I started dragging.
So
dragging that number.
these models, these pro formas can continue to be updated, or
Yeah, it's
but
it's going to be a living document.
okay.
What I'd like to see whenever the budgeting is done is, we've been doing a lot of fixing of pumps that have been fixed before. I think it's to that time when we need to actually start buying some new equipment on some of these submersible pumps and stuff, because it can only be fixed so many times to where they're actually getting worn out.
Right.
We're spending a lot of money and they're very expensive, so I think that's something that we need to start having a backup plan, to have an extra pump at Bright Road Pump Station or an extra pump at the treatment plant. A new one. That would be in capital.
That'd be your
Equipment
that'd be your
and stuff.
10-year capital plan.
Right.
Yeah.
You're spot
And
on.
that's not here, but that's just something that I think is important to look into as you're doing the budgeting for the 10 years.
That conversation is already been had with Dave Beach and Jeremy and I about, because you send it down to get repaired at the pump, the experts, and then the lead time to get it back, et cetera. So having that pump that's able to go back in, either as the backup, a new one, et cetera. So we're having those conversations about adding those in the future planning, a capital plan. Yeah, because they are expensive to buy, but we can't run without them.
Right.
So, I mean, it's a necessity for our community to have those, so, good point.
But I mean, that's 10-year capital plan discussions. You have a plan for, just like we have a plan for each of our fire trucks, for example. We can see those and all, so they're in mind. The pump you might not see, but you still have the same type of planning for it. And I would hope for each of your critical pieces of equipment.
We do, and this year was one of those scenarios that actually brought it to our attention. It was at the forefront that the primary pump went down, our secondary pumps were put into place, and the secondary pump would go down, and then we were relying on the first one to come back. So when we recognize this, we have backups, we have contingencies in our system, but when everything just kind of aligns poorly and you're relying on a turnaround time for repair and it doesn't happen, luckily we were in a situation where it was dry season and it was a non-issue, but that brought that to our forefront. We started having these conversations about,
You got lucky.
we need one more. I mean, that's the situation that it brought to our attention,
Yeah.
and so, that's why we're having that conversation, so.
Good.
Other questions on sewer? Anybody?
I think funds in good shape. No, we're not recommending any rate changes at this time.
Okay.
Sorry. Same way with storm. So hard numbers again. This was the operating revenue. So I guess I forgot to mention, but the operating revenues, or the revenues for each of these for like 24, that is the numbers that we get from the auditor's office. So that will be the same thing that you see on the capital book. So that's why you see that projection on there. And then also 25, that's kind of the numbers we are getting from that. But here again, another one of these scenarios where our revenues, our expenses are outrunning our revenues on that. One of the big things that happened this year, we had a couple storm projects and costs went up a lot more than what we were thinking. We did that Washington Avenue one. Came in a little bit higher than what we were expecting originally when we originally budgeted on that. But, you know, again, like what we talked about earlier, is a couple of these projects really has a big effect on this because when we started the year, we were at 1.9. So, you know, you do one or two storm projects, that's pretty much taking away all your revenue from it. And now all your operating expenses is pretty much coming out of your bank on that. So, again, we have all the capital within that. I do have the numbers are beefed up because of, like I said, with the long-term control plan, that's what we seen on the last one. Not saying those are the hard numbers again, but I just wanted to make sure that, okay, we got to have some of that building because we are going to be using storm fund as part of that project as well. But, you know, as we talked about earlier, you know, we can see that in that 26, 27, 28 zone is where it starts taking a hit pretty good.
So as part of the flood mitigation, we have this dry basin, and is the dry basin going to be maintained out of this fund?
Yeah, and that's part of what we have calculated.
In what year are you anticipating that?
I think we had that in the 26 time zone, 25, 26 time zone.
Do we need other addition? What's involved in that, maintaining that? Is there more personnel, or do you gotta, I don't know what?
The experts here, but it's essentially the same type of maintenance as our reservoir, water reservoir,
Yeah.
other than it's dry. So some mowing, you know, routine maintenance and preventative maintenance on the gates and so forth and things like that. So, but it would essentially be one FTE that would be out there maintaining, but we would, yeah, and then we'd have some equipment, but I feel we have equipment that can be utilized now.
Okay, so we would be hiring an additional person when that comes on? Is that fair?
Yeah, we would have, I mean, again, shared resources, but that would be, we would have a dedicated individual for that.
Okay. And that's reflected, I don't see a jump anywhere, so looking at let's look at the stormwater personnel services.
Yeah,
198
I know
goes-
we had that in our original discussion when we were going through that, but let me verify for you of where I had
It
that.
just looks like it goes up gradually, but
Yeah.
there's not another.
No, I see that, and that's what. Let me verify that for
All
you.
right.
I know we talked about that. And, let me make sure I did plug that in.
Okay.
An observation on this is if you take your revenues and you subtract your operating expenses, you get a number that you can, in essence, chuck towards capital projects. 23, that was 490,000, 480,000 in 24, 462, 448, 434, 420. Yet our capital was way over that, and so our total expenses are over total revenues. I mean, and it's kind of you asked for something to improve on this. As I was looking at it, there might be a place for that somehow in here, but I think this is another fund that now that we're not covering our ability to maintain our system, and I understand that this doesn't have grant funding in there. Don't know if I don't know what your ability to gaze into the magic ball and estimate grant funding, but right now I see an unsustainable utility, and that not changing rates for 25 means the earliest you can change your revenue number is 26. So okay, you look at your number in 26, and that's where we're at. I mean, that's what we're really working with right now, and we already know we're going to have some additional expenses on this.
If I may.
Please.
I didn't know if, okay. If you recall, about 2 years ago, we actually started down data collection, analysis of storm, anticipation of the dry basin being built and how that would look, knowing what the fund would look like. And we did different modeling to actually compare the impervious, like how would we want to change the rate structure on this based on what it looks like now. If you recall, we looked at different impervious land on properties and how that would be, how that would impact our current structure versus if we changed the modeling based on how other municipalities do this. And we actually had a really good modeling, and I still look at that as an opportunity that we need to, as you as a committee, us present that modeling and have a discussion on what the rate increase would look like and how that would impact this fund moving forward. But the way it's currently, I think there's an opportunity from how it's currently being billed to actually kind of balance out across the property owners based on the square footage of impervious property on their land. And there's examples like, you have in town you have a manufacturing plant with a lot of asphalt versus another property that might have equal square footage or acreage and it's all grass. So you want to compare apples to apples the best you can, or at least have the impact balance out with the different property owners based on how their property is structured and how it impacts our storm watershed, if you will. So we have that modeling, and if you recall, we even broke down different communities, and it's hard to say an acre of grass with a concrete slab, the apples to oranges scenarios, but a Walmart's a Walmart. A Kroger is a Kroger, a Meijer's a Meijer, et cetera.
Yeah.
So able to take like models with like impervious properties and compare those based on how they do their rate structures in their communities and what their fund looks like, then we can actually try to have a direction based on comparables to be like, we're not, and I know it's always tossed back that, well, we're not trying to be them, or we're not, we're proud of our low rates, and we are, but we have to maintain our fund at a sustainable health so we can continue to do the projects needed to get done. So with all that, we saw that coming. We were preparing to bring that to committee. I forgive me, I can't think of last week, but I think we might have even had preliminary discussions about that. But then we were looking at the water fund, and we're like, we have did a similar analysis of the water fund, and we got in a position where like, we have to act on the water fund now. So it kind of got shelved, knowing we had a bit of a runway and had more time to address that one rather than the water. So we've addressed the water, we've established a process. We're using that process over water, sanitary, and storm, as we've talked about the last hour. And so now it's time to bring that conversation back to the table about storm to understand what that looks like.
Seems like a huge effort to look at different properties and different runoff coefficients, and
Well, we wanted to make sure that we were.
that's the fairest way to do it.
That's
I
what
agree,
we
it's
wanted
very
to do.
fair.
That's
But boy,
that
it's
was
a
the
big
intent.
It's a big effort. My
That-
gosh.
I worked on a system that built in that manner, and that is a huge data effort, especially when you have somebody that then, decides to make the brick patio or their concrete patio in their backyard. It just changed in essence, should change their stormwater, and so how you keep that information up to date. But what this model tells me is that that's a discussion that we need to start having. Quite honestly, I'm wondering. I'm thinking back, as Q3 the right time, because you're not going to present You're not going to present this pro forma data in Q3 and then all of a sudden come up with a rate increase to happen in January in Q1 of the next year.
We need to be having this conversation every quarter. On the stormwater, because
Well,
We're
on any of them. I mean, you need a longer runway to put a well thought out rate increase.
especially if you're changing the structure of it.
That's
Yeah.
a big,
That's
yeah,
a
that's a
big-
big lift.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
go ahead.
Yeah, please.
As you stated that, we're talking through this, I think Q3 is important going into the budgetary process. We need to have that discussion. However, at the beginning of the year, once we have the previous year finalized, the numbers, I think that's where we can say, looking forward, this is where we need to anticipate, and then we can hardwire it. But twice a year, Q1 at the beginning, once we have true numbers from previous, moving forward, this is our action plan, and then finalize it and reevaluate it in Q3.
I'll call hogwash on that. You don't need the final numbers. You know, you're going to be close enough to knowing where your numbers are to know whether you need to start preparing for rate increases or not, because there's nothing happening in December that is going to be so seismic to change your opinion on that unless it's a catastrophe.
So
You'll always be
I guess
tweaking it.
I'm misunderstanding because we're showing you right now the runway to 27 that we need to do something between now and then. So I just want to make sure I'm not misunderstanding what you're saying. That it should be more than once a year, or the Q3 is the wrong time of the year for an annual evaluation?
I'm wondering if Q3 is the wrong time for the annual evaluation, because in really what happens in what happens in this is that I wouldn't think that this is the meeting the first time where you say, hey, we need to change rates and here's what they are. That those discussions have been going on the full time, and it's a long time before that. There's a longer runway on that, and it's just that this meeting in Q3 is when, okay, here's the proposed rates. Here's what they are. Here's the effect on the. But you don't come into this meeting and come out of it with like, okay, come up with new rates to cover. That's because you're right. We can see it. We can see it coming on for a long time. This is really the final meeting. The final. This is the final meeting where Water and Sewer makes its recommendation to the full council. It's not the first meeting of the. Yeah.
So could we have a Q1 and a Q3? You know, because, I mean, your Q1, you'll be able to see what your beginning year is, and your Q3 is more or less, I mean, if you want to say your end of year. So that way you got, because if,
The first meeting happens whenever it's appropriate.
okay,
It's just that the last meeting has got to be in Q3 where the finalized, if there's a rate change or the recommendation is no rate change, that finalized decision happens now in that Q3 meeting, so that this committee makes the recommendation to the full council, and then you have that feedback for your revenue for budgetary purposes. But, so here's the end. The start of it is when it's ever appropriate. And quite honestly, if you wanted to start having a conversation about changing your stormwater model, and you did it in November of this year for 2026 rates, fine with me. It's just that the finalization of that plan has to be completed during the Q3 meeting that we're referring to in our numbers. And I'm sorry, that didn't even occur to me until I'm looking at this and having these discussions. I kind of thought we would walk into this and do the whole thing, but no, that's not the way it would be.
And it's a great conversation point. I think when we started this journey with water rates, storm rates the last couple of years, running these numbers, the pro formas out, this is a macro level. You're looking at a year over year. And with this, we're like, okay, we need to see this coming on a month-to-month basis. And so now we've created the modeling where we actually see all these funds that we've discussed over the last hour on a month-to-month projection, not only year-to-date, but comparison to the previous years. So we're seeing it happen, so we can pivot if we need to now, like month-to-month, but as well as it rolls into this. So to your point, it shouldn't be that Q3 and all of a sudden it's like, hey, we have a problem, or we see a problem. Now we're actually able to, on a month-to-month basis, watch those trends and then have that predictability to validate what we see here.
So I guess we're saying, I guess I'm thinking for this year, we're not gonna change anything, the rates at this point. We're gonna go into a study to, you wanna, but when you're doing that, I guess I was thinking, Grant, you talked about somebody's house having a concrete patio. I don't think you wanna get into that level. I think you're looking at whole neighborhoods. This residential has this coefficient runoff, and maybe you look at C1 versus C2 versus, I don't know, maybe some big properties, industrial properties, you look at individually, but I would hope you're not gonna get into that much nitty
No,
gritty.
it's not pavers type
Yeah.
detail. It's the residentials. That's our large portion, and then you start breaking out based on industrial
Yeah.
acreage.
But you're not gonna worry about lot size and roof size on the residential. You're just gonna take a residential, yeah, thank you, okay.
The
that makes
first
sense.
category, and I'm sorry, I don't have it in front of me. I didn't know we were gonna go into this detail, but, on storm. But it's like the 12,000 or 13,000.
Let's leave that discussion for another
Yeah,
meeting.
that's fine.
Okay.
I
And
think
we'll be prepared
we're on
to
the
show
same
you the
page.
modeling
Yeah.
and everything that supports it and the why behind it.
Yeah, okay.
I think what we wanted to see tonight was this that you're
Yes.
showing us. That's what we kind of, is that
Yeah.
what we're looking for?
Yeah.
Yes?
Yeah.
If
And
it is, then I think that's the end of this
We
discussion.
were
for now.
hoping that showing you this would
Yeah.
then identify that it's time to have the bigger conversation about storm and what that looks like in the future. So
Right.
we were hoping that would be the outcome of this.
So then in terms of making a report to full council, I think, Dan, you mentioned it just now and the model show it, is that there's no recommended rate changes for 2025.
Right.
And that in the report to full council is these spreadsheets in printed form accompanying our committee report. And then if we would want to say, I mean, really the 2025 relevant recommendation is that there's no rate changes. The longer term conversations is that we're looking at two funds for 2026. The two funds are concerning, especially with some known capital projects coming.
But you can start having those conversations
Yeah.
now.
Mhm.
I don't know that we need to put that into the report. Does it, but does that, do you think that does this, I like what I see, but does this, the initial issue that we had was, hey, the rates are changing, why didn't we know about it earlier? Is this giving you and the rest of council the proper advance notice heads up? And the recommendation that as I suggested, having the spreadsheets and then our recommendation of no rate changes, does that fill the bill?
I think so.
Do we want to say in there that we're gonna look hard at those other, some indicator that those two funds are getting in trouble?
We can do that in discussion of the committee report during the
Okay.
meeting.
Okay.
It doesn't need to be a recommendation.
No, I guess it's not a recommendation, right, okay, yeah, all right. So the only recommendation is no changes for next,
Do you think it would be beneficial to have this report given to us quarterly as council on a hard sheet feed?
So if I may, this won't change on a quarterly basis. The pro forma, the 10-year pro formas that you're looking at.
Yeah.
But as I previously stated, we've created, it's in draft mode, a year-over-year comparison, month-to-month. So it's marching through the year-to-date comparison of where we are from the previous year, as well as a holistic, and it shows your operating, as well as your operating expenses compared to revenues on a graph, as well as lined out with the
This
numbers.
is the dashboard you were talking about, or?
No, that's different. That's different. This is an
Okay.
internal document
Okay.
that we've created that is more on a micro level, on a month-to-month.
Hmm.
So that would, to your point, I would think that would be something that we would provide you on a quarterly basis.
And we could discuss, although I must admit I like this format, and one of the things you could do, as you scroll up, please, as you look at 24, you have 23 actual, you have 24 year to date, and then like a percentages to the total, and then you could even maybe think where, you've set your 24 expectations there. You can then say, here's what we said at the beginning of the year. Here's
Yep.
what I expect that they are, and you put it in this format because it's kind of familiar, and it's at the right level,
Okay.
type of thing is a possibility. We can discuss that and look at that. But is there a thought that needs to be incorporated into the water rules and sewer rules that we were discussing, or is that just a practice that we incorporate?
I can tell you, before you answer, this is something that we are, from the administrative side and the water superintendent side, we're incorporating this so we can see this on a monthly basis
Okay.
and then quarterly. We had that discussion about who, the committee, the chair, quarterly, monthly, how does this information get shared with you? So you're informed as we march through the year in preparing for these annual conversations. So I wasn't anticipating having that conversation, but this is exactly the conversation we've been having internally. Now we're having this data presented.
Or wouldn't you just put it in the council packet? Like a one,
If that's what you would prefer, it's data out there, and we're collecting it. So if you think having it in the council packet on a quarterly basis, that would be,
Should this committee look at it once before we decide that?
it's
I don't
still,
know when our
it's,
next committee meeting is.
it's still
but-
in draft
Okay.
modes, but
All right. Well,
yeah,
maybe
based on
then-
your recommendation, we will clean it up and have it in a presentable form for you as a committee the
Yeah.
next time we meet. It sounds like we'll be
Okay.
meeting sooner than later.
Yeah, okay.
Okay. Let me do some writing. So our recommendation that I wrote is simply no rate changes to any utility in 2025.
I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Okay.
The ayes have it. And so I don't think we have any other business in front of the committee. So we'll
I
call
don't think
this
so.
meeting to a close at 7:15. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.